So this is going to be an interesting exploration of America in the 19th century. Now, growing up, we are programmed and conditioned through the history books, through Hollywood, through the media, of America being relatively primitive, being relatively empty, the wild, wild west, wiki wild, wild west. Cowboys and Indians, the pioneers moving west and discovering new land, new settlements, the stories of the Mormons up in Utah. And then we see photographic evidence of America in this time frame, and we see a completely different narrative begin to be told. And this picture here is from the 1893 Columbian World Fair expedition, and this is the centerpiece of the World Fair, where we see the Court of Honor, this was called, and this building here was called the Administration Building. To the left here, there was, or was the right, the Manufacturing Building. I'll go in a little bit more detail into all this, but what I find very interesting is that we have this figure here that's holding some staff with a Phrygian hat on top, and the Phrygian hat, we're told, was taken as a symbol of liberty after the Civil War. It was adopted as a symbol of liberty after the American Civil War. But the Phrygian hat has its history rooted with a number of different cultures, cultures that's supposedly separated not just by geographical location but by time. We have it associated with the Scythians who we explained and introduced earlier on as a element of the Tartarian Empire, of the Persians, the cult of Mithras with the Mithraean mystery schools. The Phrygian hat is a very, very interesting symbol to find in late 19th century America, in Chicago, of all places. Chicago, of course, as I shown on the map, Shilaga. Remember I shown you the Ortelius book earlier on, and it's shown Shilaga. Maybe this is the last remnants, the last photographic evidence of what a possible Shilaga may have looked like. So we're going to start our exploration of Old World America looking at one of its most famous cities, being San Francisco. So the official narrative on San Francisco is that pre-1769 the region was inhabited by the Ohlone people for thousands of years, we're told. And then in 1769, Gaspar de Portola expedition first discovers the San Francisco Bay. So the San Francisco Bay was supposedly first discovered in the late 18th century. And then from there it changes hands between being a Spanish settlement to then being under Mexican rule, all the way up to 1846, where the US captures what is then known as Yerba Buena during the Mexican-American War. And then in 47, Yerba Buena is then renamed San Francisco. And then coincidentally, just as the US captures or recaptures this place, in 1848 to 1850, the California Gold Rush happens, and it leads to a population boom, transforming San Francisco into a major city. So a few things that I just want to look at prior to doing a little bit more of a further deep dive. This is the old map here in 1669, so late 17th century, of the Sanson Mariette Amerique Septentrional. Don't know if that's how you say it, but they always show California to be an island, which is very interesting. And this is something that you also find in some of the 19th century occult literature, Madame Blavatsky specifically, when she talks about the 7 root races, and she talks about how California was once an island and it will become an island once again, and it will actually give birth to the next root race. But then it has a lot of myth and lore surrounding the Isle of California with its queen, supposed Queen Khalifa, and her Amazonian army. And then we have this whole, so we see like America's like mapped out from the east, and then we have this whole section here in the west and Midwest, which would have been where this supposed Russian horde would have occupied. But what we see on this map, and this isn't where San Francisco is, but we do see that there is a San Francisco noted. And this is, I believe, my geography of America isn't the best, but I believe this would be like the Big Sur area of California, and then this would be the California Bay, and we have San Francisco right here. I believe San Francisco would be more so up here. The scale is a little bit off on this map, but maybe this was a San Francisco that was known about. Maybe this was it and it's just displaced. And there's a lot of discussion and evidence surrounding the idea that Sir Francis Drake actually discovered San Francisco. Sir Francis Drake on his travels in the 16th century, and maybe it was named after him. But I just want to show you this picture here that we have as the oldest photo of San Francisco in 1850, and what we see here is a fully built out city. We see fully built out. You'd expect it to be, you know, wooden huts. You'd expect it to be Wild West. You know, the people that were going out there were people that were wanting to mine gold, chasing the gold rush. They wasn't, you know, laborers capable of, where are they getting all these bricks from? Like, look at these windows. The windows haven't even been fitted, or they've been removed, but this looks like an old building. You know, this looks like an old city. 1850. Supposedly in 1848 there was only 1,000 people inhabiting this place, but within 2 years they built it out into what we see here. You know, this building out back here. And then we see in 1856, we see, this is what I expect it to look like this, all wooden shacks, like single 2-story floor buildings. I don't expect to see buildings like this, you know, with columns. You know, like look at these columns. I want to know what these are on the pediments here. What sort of symbology is on display? But you don't expect to see these type of buildings. And again, it's like mud flooded as well here. You can see like they got some windows popping out of the ground. What is this building doing here within 6 years of people just first moving here? You should be focusing on developing a sustainable community through agriculture, through, you know, just protecting yourself from bandits and Indians, natives I should say. Not building this, not focusing on building buildings like this. Where are you getting the skilled labor for this, the materials for this? And then another thing that I raised my eyebrow is that the California gold rush we see here, this was the gold mining region, with this region here, this orange region, being where the mother lode, quote unquote, was to be found. And here is San Francisco. Now San Francisco is about 200 plus miles away from this area, so we're told that San Francisco experienced a population boom because of the gold rush. But if you were participating in the gold rush, why would you want to be positioned 200 miles away? 200 miles away, where you have to lug all of your gold through the Wild West without the infrastructure in place, no road networks, no railways in place to be able to get you back to San Francisco, which is on the coast here. It seems completely impractical and dangerous. Why would you not prefer to live like literally at the mine itself? Like, you'd want to live like right around here. Sacramento would be a way better town to choose. And you look at the population of Sacramento during this time frame and over the spanning years, and it didn't boom nowhere near as much as San Francisco. And that does raise an eyebrow to me. Why would you do that? Why would you put your life at risk to travel 200 miles back? 200 miles, they didn't have cars, it was like, that would have been a few days plus of travel to get to the gold mine, to do your work, and then you have to go all the way back. Someone please make sense of that to me. Maybe I don't know the full story. I don't even need to know the full story. I look at this and I know it's bullshit. And then this makes it even more bullshit when you see this. So between 1849 and 1851, San Francisco got burned down to the ground 6 times. 6 times in the space of 2 years, guys. So the first fire, December 24th, 1849, 50 buildings get burnt down, $40 million worth of damage. Okay? So less than 6 months after, boom, a second fire happens. 300 buildings this time, $160 million worth of damage. So these figures here are adjusted to inflation of what the value would be in today's money. Third fire, so a month after, another fire, 150 buildings, $200 million worth of damage. And this is the official story of San Francisco, guys. I'm not making this up. And then a few months after, a fourth fire happens. 200 buildings, $20 million worth of damage. Then, about 8 months after or so, we have a fifth fire in May 4th, 15th. So May 4th on 1850, and in exactly a year to the day, to commemorate such a fire, we have a fifth fire. 18 city blocks, not just any fire, but the most damaging fire of all. 1,500 buildings, $480 million worth of damage. And then again, a month after, just like it was a month after again, from before the previous year, 500 buildings go down, 14 city blocks, $120 million in damage. All within 2 years, total damages caused at $1.02 billion. Now, someone please explain to me how a city that is a brand new city in 1848, that had only 1,000 people living there in 1848, in the space of 2 years, whilst all of these fires start to kick off, not only can you have a civilization or a population boom, how do you have 6 fires that destroys thousands of buildings, just over 1,000 buildings? Well, no, it's over 2,000 buildings. How have these people in the space of 2 years built 2,000 buildings? How have they built 2,000 buildings that are worth the grand total of $1.2 billion? Like $1.2 billion of infrastructure is not the sort of infrastructure that's being built by primitive, gold-minded individuals. They're out there trying to mine the gold. They're not out there trying to build a metropolis of ancient Rome. When you're looking at these buildings, and they're like, oh, the fires happened because it was all wooden structures. It wasn't wooden structures. This is in 1850. We can see it here. It's all bricked out. How are these fires happening? And how are they happening in such close succession to one another? You think if the first fire happened, you're like, fuck, we made some mistakes with our urban planning. We made some mistakes. We shouldn't have had so many wooden buildings placed here and there. All right, let's rebuild. Let's go back to the drawing board. We're not gonna allow this to happen again. 6 months after, boom, a second fire happens, but this time 300 buildings. How those 300 buildings were already there, I don't know. And you're like, fuck, how has this happened again? And then a month after, another fire. It's like, how are these people allowing these fires? Why have they not got, a plan in place to prevent, a prevention plan in place to stop these fires from spreading or happening? 18 city blocks. How has a town that has only been experiencing a population boom for less than a year at this point got 18 city blocks worth of buildings worth $480 million? It's absolutely ludicrous to believe this. This was all here prior. This was an old world settlement. This was an old world town that's been known about for a very long time. That's the only way to explain how it's possible to build out infrastructure in place, brick buildings like this, And then what's happened is that there was a systematic planned attack to destroy San Francisco, to destroy the remnants of an old world, to destroy the evidence that something was there prior, because it didn't fit the narrative that they were going for, which was it's all because of the California gold mining boom. When evidently, if this was in Sacramento, I'd believe it much more, but look how far away it is. 200 plus miles away from where the gold mine was. Just absolutely atrocious. Doesn't make sense. Absolute bullshit to me. Yeah. And we're going to move on and have a look at this picture of San Francisco. So then again, look, these are the historical population figures. 1848, 1,000 people. By 1849, within a year, they've got 24,000 more people. And then in order to be able to have a city that can expand and scale at that rate and still have food, water, shelter for people, I just don't see how that's possible, how it can expand at such a rate. And then we look at this picture here and we just see a fully built, so this is a time frame of, okay, so it's about 200,000 people here, which, okay, but this is a city for millions of people. And you're looking at this, and look at the advanced architecture that we're seeing. Again, we got a little bit of Antiquitech here popping out. We got a little bit here popping out. But all brick. I see so many brick buildings. Very interesting enough. This area over here, I believe, is where the 1915 Pan American World Fair exhibition took place. And we see there is something going on over there, almost as if the structures were already there in place. But we'll get to that later on. These buildings, big mansion up here. These are the sort of buildings you'd expect to see, little wooden shacks, little wooden shacks just sporadically placed around. But look at the infrastructure, the grid layout. You got church here. You got some sort of cathedral thing over here, looks fucking burnt out. And again, they got the technology in 1878 to be taking photographs with this level of detail in. Where's all the construction photos for all these buildings? Some of these buildings are grand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 floors of that building just there alone. All of this for 200,000 people. Big building here. Look at the streets, churches. Look at this one, this church here. That looks like that St. Basil's Cathedral, doesn't it, in Moscow? Look at the dome that we have going on there. Big sort of church here. We just see spires everywhere popping out. All brick buildings. Again, I've shown you at the beginning with their accessibility to produce bricks at that scale, at that time frame. How were they getting all of these bricks? The brick and mortar, how were they bringing them over to here when there wasn't, when the availability for transportation wasn't there? The Panama Canal wasn't supposedly created then, so you couldn't have just sailed, or you couldn't have sailed from, through America. You would have had to been on rail freight. Big church here, big buildings over here. Look how far off it goes into the distance. This is a city for millions of people, where millions of people once lived. And this is even after all of the damage that was caused by those great fires. So they did have to build up some of this, which they can do over the space of 30, 40 years. But they can't do that. They can't do the whole thing. They can't do the whole thing. That's a farce. So that's San Francisco, and now we're going to move into some panoramic maps that I really like to explore in more detail. So all these panoramic maps are from the Library of Congress. You can check them out for yourself. They're all historical documents. This is San Diego in 1880, and we're told with published historical figures that 1880, there was a population of about 2,700 people. So this is Coronado Beach, and what we're told is that this is San Diego over here. This looks like what I would expect a population of 2,700 people to look like. That's what I expect it to look like. What I don't expect is this island or whatever it is off the coast of it to be, you know, landscaped the way that it has with this grid-like structure. For 2,700 people, you've got a railway running through it. And what is this? What is this? What is 2,700 people doing creating something like this? Someone please enlighten me. What is these structures as well? Almost like primitive pylons, but very weird looking. But what's going on? Like, how do you build something like this? This reminds me of a building in Halifax in the UK. I forgot what it's called now. It's a grade 1 listed building. What is going on? How has 2,700 people built that? I'm going to explain what my idea behind this grid structure is later on, more specifically in part 2 of the presentation, because I believe that there was a reason for this, and these people didn't build it, of course. This was already here. And there's a reason why America is all gridded out the way that it is, and we're programmed with, you know, sayings like, oh, get off the grid. It's because it was a grid, an ancient grid, a grid for a very specific reason, but we'll explore that. Very interesting little Star of David down there. Interesting. But for 2,700 people, this seems like overkill to me. How have they done this? Not possible. Sorry, will not accept that. Will not accept that that's a possibility to be able to do that. Someone else might, but not me. And in Los Angeles in 1891, we're looking at about 50,000 people inhabiting Los Angeles. Now, I understand that some people may not find this architecture as interesting or as mind-blowing as myself. You're probably too conditioned to living in a city that's got a lot of skyscrapers around, that's got big glass buildings, big tower blocks, but you need to put yourself in the context and frame of reference of the people of the day with the technology that they had available. Look at this big, what's this? The county courthouse. Big clock tower here, big bell tower on top, big dome, mud flooded windows down here. Phillips block, good old Phil, just owning a block with, you know, something that looks like it could be, you know, some Parisian palace. Good old Phil. And again, you see the same sort of, look at these buildings, just like so over the top for just a population of 60,000 people. City Hall. You know, the high school, was education such a priority at that point in time where they needed a high school with like some old world, you know, castle-like structure, turrets on it, big clock tower, bell tower, mud flooded, you know, get onto the ground floor, you have to go up. Why don't you just make it on the ground floor? And look at this grid layout, the landscaping, the urban planning, you know, the attention to detail, the resources, just not there to be able to produce any of this. I'm sorry, I will not accept it. And for me, like, these are, when I look at these, the actual point of these maps, these are sale catalogs. These are catalogs to catalog these old world buildings and these founded cities so that it can be bidded upon. You know, America is a corporation. Everything's for sale in America. You're for sale. You are for sale. You're on the US Stock Exchange. That's what your birth certificate's for. And when you see this, I see that all these buildings are just listed for sale. Who wants to come in and bid for this? Who wants to own that? You know, this is a building that we found. We can repurpose it as the City Hall. This is the building that we found. We can repurpose it as the German Fruit Co. wholesale house. The German Fruit Co. wholesale house. What, you just had the accessibility to ship fruit from Germany? Alright, fresh fruit from Germany for the local inhabitants of Los Angeles in the 1890s. Yes, what a luxury. New Orleans. Now, New Orleans does have a little bit more of a depthy history to it. French occupation. 1851, we see a registered population of about 116,000 people. But when I'm looking at this again, okay, so we got, I believe that's St. Louis Cathedral. I've been to New Orleans. I had my little beignets down here. Did like those beignets. But when I see this, I see a fully bricked out, built out city. You know, look at the size of this. These big columns, big dome, spires everywhere on every block. You know, this is a city that's for millions of people. Look how far off this goes off into the distance. Just all brick building. And you could say, oh, you know, this is just an artist depiction. You know, it's just an artistic depiction. How do we know it was all there? I was like, well, why else would they draw all of this? Like, just leave all this empty if it's not there. But look, it just goes on. And this is a city that's a very old city. Obelisk thing here. Big victory column, or yeah, they normally call them victory columns. Obelisk for me though. Big dome on this building. Very interesting. Down in the corner here, just some little manor house, some little castle, just having this bit of land to themselves. The old steamboats. You know, you put so much detail into everything else, like why would you then falsify all of this? I just find it fascinating, you know, 1850s, like I said, Wild West, how is all of this here? Make it that what you will. And then Pueblo in Colorado, 1890, population of about 25,000 people. I find this very interesting because again, it's just a grid layout, guys. It's like, you know, the grid that's already there. It would take so long to survey this whole land, especially up in the Rocky Mountains where nothing's level, it's all uneven. And then look, you can see the higher bits here, lower bits there, all built out, all this grid placed, all like geometrically symmetrical and correct. Like, how have you done that? And then you look at some of these buildings. So for 25,000 people, let's just keep in mind. Then we have this building here. It looks very Egyptian-esque to me. This was called the Pueblo Mineral Palace, or the Colorado Mineral Palace, and this was a place that was built supposedly in the span of 2 years, from 1889 to 1890. So upon the creation of this map, this would have been brand new, and it was created with the purpose of storing valuable minerals and ores that had been mined from all the surrounding areas. And the director of this place was Benjamin Guggenheim, from the Guggenheim family, the Guggenheim Museum in New York. He was the director. And Benjamin Guggenheim, of course, was one of the unfortunate lizards that was taken out in Titanic when he objected against the creation of the Federal Reserve. Him and John Jacob Astor, who we'll also be looking at later on, they both got taken out if Titanic really sank, or if it was a sister ship, whatever. I'm not going to discuss that on this presentation. And J.P. Morgan housed his own private collection here at the Mineral Palace. And when you look inside of this Mineral Palace, I really recommend that you go and look at pictures of it. It's a very interesting place when you look at the design. The internal design looks like a European palace, and I just don't see how they managed to build that in 2 years in the middle of the Rocky Mountains. Again, we have a lot of factories here. 25,000 people though. Bit overkill. Just this whole layout for me. You know, this whole layout, I don't know how they've gridded any of this out. In the Wild Wild West, let's not forget. And above sea level. You know, above sea level. Alrighty then. Pueblo, Colorado. Actually, just to quickly zoom in on here, some of these other buildings that you see, again, just these buildings, central block, just complete overkill for 25,000 people. And this Union Depot is very interesting to look at. When you actually look at the real Union, there are photos of Union Depot, and you can see that for yourself. The Grand Hotel, is there that many people that's visiting Pueblo, Colorado in 1890 that they need a palace-like hotel? Maybe so. Maybe there was. Elmira, New York. There wasn't anything particularly spectacular with the architecture that I wanted to point out here. We're looking at a place that supposedly had a population of just over 15,000 people. It has a big railway track running through it. East Coast, so, you know, more believable than such, more of a population, more resources available. But for me, it's the grid layout. You're looking at these grid layouts, and it's like, why does there need to be such an immense grid layout for a town of just 20,000 plus people? Like, look at the size. Like, that would go on for miles. You're looking at miles of distance here, just perfectly symmetrical, straight grid, like gridded out landscape, and it just doesn't make sense to me. If it makes sense to you, please tell me. Please tell me how they did this and why they did this. Because all of America is gridded out, and it's not like that in England. It's not like that in Europe. It's like that in America, and in other places of the world actually that I will show in more detail in part 2. Nova Scotia and Halifax. Or Halifax in Nova Scotia, I should say, sorry. 1879. Again, not necessarily something that I was particularly impressed with the infrastructure or buildings but more so I just wanted to show you the Star Fort. The Star Fort's still there. Supposedly the Star Fort was built in the late 1700s by the Brits when we occupied that piece of real estate, because it is real estate. And it just makes me think, like, how old is this place? Not necessarily the buildings or the landscaping, but just this bit here. Like I told you, I don't believe that these star forts were built by the people we're told they were built by. And it shows that if they weren't built by who we're told they were built by, and they're much more ancient, you know, we've seen dating back thousands of years in what I was showing you in Europe, and they're built by the same hand. You know, that would mean that there was peoples thousands of years back in America with the capabilities to build a star fort as such. And I do believe America is the real old world. I believe that we've been led to believe that the old world was Mesopotamia, you know, just Europe has the rich history that it does. But I think that the real old world, you know, and then they found Egyptian artifacts in the Grand Canyon. That's something that we will be looking at in part 2 as well, in regards to what the Grand Canyon actually is and how it was formed. I think America was the old world, the real old world, and something happened and the survivors had to go east and west, and then they went on, the survivors of that cataclysm went on to form the Vedic civilization, the Mesopotamian civilization, and you link it all back to like Indo-European, the Aryan race. Maybe the Aryan race came from America, the real ancient America. And that is that. Moving on. Again, this is another example of just extreme, over-the-top urban planning. So this is in Port Arthur in Texas. 1901, population 900 people. Now supposedly there was more people that lived here in the late 19th century, but it was hit by a hurricane and a lot of people evacuated. But I don't see it have been inhabited by such a population where they've built out something like this. Like, what is going on here? Look at this layout. For 900 people, 900 people is about the amount of people I had in my school when I was at school. 900 people can fit into one building, a school building. How do those 900 people then survey and landscape all of this? Please tell me, please inform me in the comments below. But something to think about. What is going on with this? And then we move on to a little examination into the history of the Salt Lake City Temple. It's actually one of my favorite buildings. I'm trying to show you a few of my favorite buildings in this presentation. Just something about this very magical, almost like a Disney-esque castle. Something very epic about it. And then we do actually have photographic evidence of the supposed construction of this, but keep in mind I've shown you that they had, when they did, in this time frame, the ability to manipulate photos and to manipulate the scale of photos and create optical illusions in photos. But we see that in 1865 there's nothing at this site, and then all of a sudden in 1870 they've just got the big turnabuckle, is that how you say it? Turnabuckle, something like that, you know what I mean. Just no construction photos of that. It just appears, just manifests into the third dimension. And then we see over the next 10 years there is photographic evidence of just slowly building this up, right? Until we get to about 88. It goes a bit more, 89, and we can kind of see the top of it being built out there. So in the space of like 10 years, they've built this temple out, so we're told. Okay, just keep it in mind. And then they've recently done some renovations and they had to dig into the foundation, and again they just found this part of the building just completely submerged, an older part of the building, and it goes deep. It goes 14 feet for the granite foundation, and then it goes into a sub-foundation sandstone of these bigger bricks, almost like megalithic bricks. Look at the size of this guy compared to these bricks. So just keep that in mind as well. Something much older, something very suspicious here going on. And I wanted to then show you this. So this is one of the panoramic maps made of Salt Lake City in 1870. And this shows that a population of just under 13,000 people inhabiting this land. Let's not talk about the grid layout yet, but let's talk and discuss why a fully built out Salt Lake City Temple is being shown on a map in 1870 when supposedly they haven't even laid the foundation stone at that point. Yet here we have it fully built out amongst a fully built out grid of Salt Lake City. Somebody tell me what is going on here. 1870, so there's still another 10 years to go yet until they would have finished this. Yet here it is, fully built out. 12,000 people at 10,000 feet elevation in Utah, in Salt Lake City. Where and how? Where have they got the resources to build this? They should again be focusing on, pursuing sustainable agriculture, on sheltering from the elements, from finding, a sustainable, clean source of water, food production. But no, we're just going to build a grandiose castle, one of the most epic, grandiose temples in the world. We're just going to build it. There's only 13,000 of us. We haven't really got much else going on out here in the middle of the mountains. And then who have we got here? The boys are in town. The boys are back. Boys are rolling in with the goods. The boys are in the goods. So this isn't the only piece of evidence to go off of Salt Lake City in 1870. We then have another panoramic map which shows Salt Lake City in 1875. And it's the same story here, where we have a fully kitted out Disney temple right here. Same grid-like pattern from a different orientation this time though, different vantage point. But again, very hard to believe. Utah Central, oh, look at that, Utah Central Railway. So again, you know, not maybe at like 20,000 people this time, and just 75. So again, it shouldn't have been built yet. It didn't finish off until, you know, 1890. Yeah, here we are, Utah, 1875. Now, what's your thoughts on that? Do you think it's solely down to just artistic depiction of what it's going to look like and that's why it's there? Or do you think that it was already there and they've just, you know, drew it on as they saw it? What is your thoughts? I would like to know. So, urban planning and landscaping, this scale, was it possible during this time frame? The amount of work required to achieve these kinds of large-scale transformations seen in the prior depicted grid pattern cityscapes is immense. The process would involve a comprehensive series of steps and considerable labour, resources and time. These were, in respect to the official narrative, brand new towns and cities in the mid-late 1800s US of A, with very small populations and limited resources openly available due to their relative rural locations. How did just a few thousand people, who should have been focusing on functional survival, food, water, shelter, prioritizing sustainable agricultural development, crop cycles, irrigation, sewage for the community, be capable of allocating such resources needed to organize the following? So in order to build out such a city, initial surveying and planning. So you needed a topographical survey, detailed mapping of the natural landscape, including elevations, vegetation, and existing structures. Urban planning, developing a master plan that outlines the layout of streets, plots, infrastructure, and public spaces. Then site preparation and earthworks, clearing and excavation, removing any existing vegetation, rocks and structures, and excavating to create a level base. That would have been very hard, as shown when you're working at elevation within the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, or you're working up in Utah in Salt Lake City. Grading and leveling, reshaping the land to ensure proper drainage, road foundations and construction sites. No sign of construction sites whatsoever, everything's just built out from the get-go. This can involve significant earth-moving work, especially if the terrain is uneven or hilly. Soil stabilization, techniques to reinforce the soil, such as compacting or adding stabilizing materials to support the infrastructure, especially when you're building such massive buildings. Infrastructure installation, road construction, laying roads and creating intersections and walkways. This involves a substantial amount of asphalt, concrete or brickwork. Again, we've shown that the grid pattern layout was already there from the get-go. Utility lines, installing water, sewer infrastructure beneath the grid layout. Stormwater management, creating drainage systems and stormwater retention areas to handle runoff or preventing floods. Obviously, they didn't seem to care about that. It was just already in place. Landscaping and aesthetic design, tree planting in green spaces, introducing trees, grass and other vegetation to line streets and populate parks. Public spaces, developing parks, squares and recreational areas to enhance the quality of life for residents. Pavement and sidewalks, constructing pedestrian pathways and ensuring accessibility across the grid. Scope of work, so the workforce and machinery needed. This project would require a large number of skilled labourers, civil engineers, architects and heavy machinery operators. Bulldozers, excavators, graders and dump trucks would be essential for the earth moving phase, followed by asphalt pavers, cranes and other sophisticated equipment for infrastructure. They had none of that available other than horse and buggy and pulley systems. Time frame. Any project of this kind of magnitude could take anywhere from several years to a decade or more to complete with the advanced machinery just stated. Major urban projects with comprehensive infrastructure typically range between 5 to 20 years, depending on funding, workforce availability, and environmental factors. Challenges. Costs. Such projects would require billions of dollars, especially even today with modern labor and material costs. Environmental impact. Large-scale clearing and grading can have significant environmental effects, requiring mitigation strategies to maintain ecological balance. Not on their mind whatsoever. Logistics. Coordinating various phases of the project and managing the supply of material, workforce, and equipment. They had none of this available, guys. Yet they somehow managed to build out these cities in less than a decade with a few thousand people. It makes you think. Which moves us on to the next piece, where we're going to inspect some of this architecture from these cities in more detail with lost architecture and impossible builds. Another one of my favorite buildings is this Bannerman Castle. Bannerman Castle is found upriver on the Hudson River. It was supposedly created or built by a man named Francis Bannerman, hence the name, Bannerman's Island. Francis Bannerman himself was supposedly a businessman that originated from Scotland, and he had a fascination with wartime memorabilia, wartime surplus equipment, munitions, essentially a arms dealer, you could say. And his business, after moving from Scotland to America, became so profitable that he needed to expand, and he needed a place to be able to house all of this surplus military equipment from the American Civil War and just other military equipment from around the world. He needed to expand, and he needed a place so big that he decided to purchase this little island in the middle of the Hudson River, upriver New York State, and build a castle reminiscent of his days back in Scotland. So his business is doing so good that he decides to isolate himself. He decides to isolate himself on an island in the middle of the Hudson River and build a castle to hold all of his stock. And then in 1906, I believe that there was a fire, coincidentally, that destroyed this place. But what we can see here, or what I can see, is an old world castle, an old world American castle that has been replastered. It was originally old red brick, and it was plastered, rebranded Bannerman Island Arsenal. How can anyone run? It's hard enough running a business with all of the logistics in place, guys. It's nearby impossible, if not just outright impossible, to run a business where your stock is held on an island in the middle of New York State, in the middle of a river, in the early 20th century. What was going on? But it's a very interesting building. It's actually interesting to explore that island in a little bit more detail. There's a lot of ruins. It's a very small island. Supposedly it has its history linked back to the Dutch as well, the Dutch occupation of that area further back in time. Just a very interesting. You don't see castles like that in America, or you don't think of castles of that style and stature and size being present in North America. Yet here we are. So anyway, moving on, we're going to have a little look now into all of this lost architecture, and we will start off by investigating the City Hall Post Office, New York State, 1905 this photo was taken, designed by Alfred Mullett, completed in 1880 and demolished in 1939. So the point of the lost architecture is just to show you buildings that existed that no longer exist now. So they were destroyed and replaced for whatever reason. Some they were replaced with car parks and other things that are needed in the modern world, and some were just destroyed for no reason. But you know, we got the wrought iron, little bell tower up here, little Antiquitech antenna. But again, just look at the people. You know, 1905, they had electricity by then, but they didn't in 1880. Didn't have power tools. Just a lot of brick structures all over. Big spire down here. Post office, just the sort of design that you would have set from, you know, you go to an architect and you're like, we want you to design a functional post office for us, please. And they come back with their plans, and you're like, yep, I approve. Let's build this. This is a functional, practical post office right here. Look at the wrought iron on the top, a little bit of Antiquitech here. Very techy looking. Again, you know, ground floor, you need to go up a few floors to get there. The floor that is the ground floor is cut in half, mud flooded out. 4th Avenue, Pittsburgh, 1904, demolished in 1966. I also find this little thing interesting on the wall. Like, it's like, you see the wings? What's going on there? It's kind of like a little kind of creature. Some sort of like ornamentation on this building, which is like this weird sort of like fairy creature. Really weird. Very weird. The Ryan Hotel, St. Paul, Minnesota. So 1905, this was demolished in 1962, same thing. You already got the eye for it now. You can see on the top, the spires. And then look at the footprint of this big building, opened, didn't say built, just opened in 1885. We can see it's mud flooded on the bottom. This reminds me of one of those buildings that we were looking at in India, you know, with this big sort of castle-like sort of turret here. The Holoden is in Cleveland, Ohio. Demolished in 1862 though. Same time as this, demolished in 1862. They seem to have been, when was this, in 1866? They ran amok in the 60s, didn't they? Yeah, people too focused on the Cold War, and then whilst they were keeping everyone fearful, they were out destroying the old world. Big epic building here, the Chicago Federal Building, supposedly built in 7 years between 1898 and 1905, but not much use after that. 60 years or so later, let's get rid of it. Mud flooded out. Big epic building. Just look at the size of this. Look at these little people, you know, mud flooded out again, just a few steps to get up to ground level. Big columns. Look at the size of these columns. Big dome on top, and just surrounded by these epic big brick buildings. This is Shalaga of the old world, and they needed to remove the evidence of such. Remove this, build a big skyscraper. That takes everyone's attention away from these buildings here as well. Look at this, the Bentz Building, Broad and South Penn Square, so Philadelphia. 1900s, destroyed in 1926. Mud flooded out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, like 15 stories high. Very big bit, little Antiquitech there with the ball on top. Yeah, just lost architecture, lost the time. Like, why would you destroy any of this? Why would you destroy this sort of architecture? The Metropolitan Methodist Church in Washington, D.C. This photo was in 1924 and it was demolished in 1936. This isn't necessarily such a spectacular building in itself. It's just the spire is so tall and epic looking. And again, just like a bit of tech on top, but it's just the size of that spire that really captured my attention. And then also in the background here, like this big dome going over here. I don't know what this is. Yeah. Jefferson Memorial? I don't know. Courthouse. Just what you need for a courthouse. Columbus, Ohio, 1907. So it was built in 1884, again without any power tools, and was demolished in January 2012. So very recently this was demolished. Yeah, no news of that, just gone, taken away. Taken from us, mud flooded out. Very epic, look at all the raw iron, big epic bell tower. Wonder who that is on top. Yeah, so it's a few buildings for you. And then here's a few more. So we'll start off with a very famous building, the San Francisco Cliff House of 1896. This was the supposed second iteration of it. It burnt down many occasions, yet they still decide to keep rebuilding in the same spot, as you do, as seems to be a common occurrence with all these narratives. But again, you know, this looks very Transylvanian. You know, that sort of castle-like top to it, Antiquitech on top. Yeah, very, very spectacular building. Burned to the ground 1907. Detroit Museum, opened in 1888, and within 80 years, destroyed. So again, not necessarily like super spectacular. It's just the fact that it's not here anymore. Again, 1960. There was something up with the 60s, wasn't there? It's just that style of building, and this is something that I saw a lot of when I was young and I came to America in Florida. I just see buildings like this, and you just don't get that sort of building here in the UK. And there is something about it. It's just like an epic building, and everything's bigger in America, as if it was built by giants, by a giant race. Just everything's bigger. The infrastructure's bigger, the roads are bigger, the curbs are bigger. Obviously the giants didn't build the roads and the curbs, but the buildings are bigger. They're like, it's like the size and scale, like the circumference of this turret here just looks so much bigger than it needs to be. And again, it's mud flooded. I wouldn't be surprised if again it's got a few stories underground, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps to get up to ground level, so it still goes further underground. Relatively young trees planted around here as well. And then this building reminds me of something that you'd see in like Harry Potter in like a botanist class. You know, a botanist sort of like alchemy lab. So this is the exhibition building in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 1872. Oh, destroyed by fire as you do in 1905. But look at this. Something about this design. Look at this. I bet this big atrium here inside would have been really cool. Really epic looking inside. You know, a lot of glass, a lot of light coming into this sort of greenhouse here. And supposedly that was built in like a year or two as well. Very fascinating building. And then we have the Mark Hopkins Mansion, San Francisco, 1878. This photo was taken and it burnt down in 1906. A very Tartarian-esque design to it. I like this design on the edge here, and there's something about that sort of rotunda with the glass. And then here, this Sheriff Street Market in Ohio. So you know when I said earlier on with the underground, the underground that I showed in Cincinnati, Ohio. This is what the building looked like. That it was underground. That it was underneath. So again, a market house. But again, it's like the size of this, like the amount of bricks this would take. I'd like to see what was on that pediment there. Is the size and scale of this building. It's not necessarily like the features on it, it's just like the actual just the footprint of this building is massive, and it probably goes underground. Garrick Theatre in Chicago, Illinois, opened in 1891, destroyed within the next 60 years, 70 years. But look at the inside of this theatre. Look at the intricacies of this design. And this was destroyed and replaced with a parking garage. So this is the outside of it, and then this is the inside. But again, the attention to detail. What did I say? It's the attention to detail. The detail is where the spirit manifests. Crazy. And then we have this place here, which was the Waterworks Park in Detroit. This photo was in the 1870s. And then, yeah, the water tower here. It's like, I don't know why they keep trying to convince people that these things were water towers. It's like, what is the practicality of holding water in these towers? Where is the water held? It really, like, I see that as like some sort of computer component, some sort of like obelisk-like computer antennae. Not a fucking water tower. But this here, again, cool looking building. Already looks like it's been boarded. It's only just opened and it's already been boarded up. It's already been opened and they've already been like, you know what, these windows ain't doing it for us. Let's just brick them up. Brick them up, boys. And then you've got these fellas here. You always see in these pictures as well, like these gentlemen with top hats on. He's got his hand in his coat, hidden hand. I'll show you some more hidden hand evidence later on. Almost as if like they've taken claim, like this is ours now. You see this? This is ours now. We own it. We own this land. And then we move into the impossible builds. So a few fairy tales to explore here in further detail. So Williamson Building in Cleveland, Ohio again, built in 1 year between 1899 and 1900, only to be demolished 80 years later. So this here, you know, you're looking at 15 plus stories, completely, you know, bricked out. 1 year to build. Like, these people with their horse and cart, how are they building something like this in 1 year? Like the door arch here, is that so necessary for people of 5 to 6 feet? You know, this massive arch here. 1 year, guys. And then this one here, the Tennessee Club, 1888 to 1890. So 2 years to build this. Maybe you could. Mud flooded though. For me, I just like the architectural design of this. Like this dome on top, I find really aesthetically pleasing. I'd like to live in here. It looks really cool. But again, you know, in order to get onto the first floor, a few flights of stairs up, here, here, and here. Look at this one. So this is the New Hotel Neverland, built in 1 year between 1892 to 93, demolished only 30 years afterwards. So look at this. To put all of the effort into building this with its like 15 plus levels, all the detailing on the top, the turrets, got some sort of like cymatic window up here, Antiquitech. In 1 year. In 1 year to build this. I don't know why they went with such an unbelievable narrative for it. It's like, at least make it a little bit more believable. I guess they are correct. No one gives a fuck and no one digs and asks these sort of questions. So they have got away with it. And, you know, it's got demolished, so you wouldn't even know. They supposedly build it in a year and then they delete it. The thing is, they didn't build it. It was already here, evidently. It was already there, and it probably took them a year to unbury it. That's what a year takes. It's probably to unbury it, maybe like wash it down. Maybe put a new facade on the outside, clean it up a little bit. Here's another one. City Hall in New York building, built in 1 year, 1880 to 1890, and then to be demolished in 1955. But look at this. I mean, this looks very old, but it's just, again, you can see all the Antiquitech antennae everywhere, but look at this. It kind of looks like it was part of like another building that should have been onto the side of it. Almost like this was a flank, like a side flank of a greater building that would have took up space here. Because if you're looking at the biogeometry of this, as I was discussing earlier, with the negative green, the horizontal negative green, there's also another aspect called vertical negative green. And if the vertical negative green isn't balanced by horizontal negative green, then it causes it can cause some electromagnetic interference. And it just looks like the way that this is rounded here and this is straight, it looks like there should have been something here There should have been some big, filling up this whole area that we see here. Something even grander and bigger should have been right there. To build that in 1 year, though, is absolutely silly. What bullshit. City Hall, Louisville in Kentucky, built between 1870 and 73. So in 3 years, they whipped this up in Kentucky. In Kentucky. Again, you have to go up a few floors in order to get to the first floor. Everything else is buried underground. Big bell tower here, which you can still see the bell in use. That's kind of cool. Looks smaller. Looks like it should have had a bigger bell. Would have liked to have seen the pediment here if it would have been like Phoenician adornments, if it would have been Romanesque. Then we have this place here, which is the House of Providence Hospital, Detroit, 1909. I mean, it's a castle. Look at it. And this is it here. So look at the actual footprint of it. And they managed to whip this bad boy up in a year. That's it there. In a year they built that. Again, it's like they like their castles. They like to whip up their castles in a year or so, don't they? In late 19th century America. Oh, that's early 20th century. And this is a very cool building. So this is the Beach Hotel in Galveston. So they built this in 1 year, between 1882 and 1883, and unfortunately it was destroyed by fire in 1898. How do you build something on a beach? How do you get the foundation to be able to build like a really sophisticated construction like this on a beach in 1 year when the tide comes in and out? Yeah. Someone please tell me. Striped as well. I believe it was red and white striped. Would have looked really cool, this. Maybe it had something to do with the hydropathy that I shown before. Again, you've got like a little kind of like bandstand here. Maybe that was like a water fountain or something, public water fountain. But I definitely think this was some sort of like hydropathy facility, just because it would have used the waters of the Gulf. Yeah. Impossible builds continued, and then we're looking at, let's start up here. So demolition specials. I like that they even used to kind of put it out there as if like it was you know, a display to go and watch. Demolition specials, getting rid of it. The New York Life Insurance Company building, Minneapolis, Minnesota. 1890, so 2 years to build, and then they got rid of it 50 years later. But again, mud flooded out. But it's the inside, you know, that's the other thing as well. I'm showing you the outside of these buildings, but the insides are just as spectacular. Look at these spiral staircases. You know, like I told you, spirals create toroidal fields. It's all to do with the augmentation of electromagnetic fields. Wrought iron everywhere, spirals everywhere on the stairs. What a shame to be demolished. The CM Forbes mansion, built in 1 year, and it's not necessarily a spectacular grand building. It just looks really cool to me. Like these details up here, it's all of the ornamentation on it. You know, it's just very techy, very futuristic. It's very retro future, actually. Very retro futuristic. And then just weird window design here. But again, ground level, you need to go up a few steps. Demolished in 1930. The Boeing house left, and the CR maybe mansion, just as you do, having a little pyramid out back in the back garden for the kids to enjoy. Both destroyed in the early 1910s or 1900 to 1910 somewhere. Don't know why they haven't got a specific date on that. But again, proper old world-esque buildings here. These are like the definition of like an old world manor for an old world people. An old world people that look, new trees that have been planted. So these would have been found. They would have been unburied to an extent. They repave the sidewalks. They plant new trees. But a very old building nonetheless. And then we've got the New York Hippodrome, built in less than 1 year. Again, just a ludicrous story. Between 1904 and 1905, photographic evidence of the building, of the construction, demolished in 1939. Do you know what this reminds me of? These little balls on top, they remind me of like tensor rings, of tensor spheres, where you coil wrap copper into like these shapes, and it creates like a tensor field. This reminds me of that. But again, it just looks kind of out of shape and out of proportion. Looks very kind of top heavy. Looks like it should be a much bigger building. I really like this building as well. The Erie County Bank Buffalo, opened in 1893, demolished in 1968. But again, why do you need this as a bank? What function does this serve as a bank? We look at a lot of antiquitech on the top. Very, very cool looking tech components on the top of this. But it's something to do with the facade, like the way that the brick looks on the outside. It just looks very castle-like, very epic. So much like grandiose to it. Mud flooded out, little bell tower over on this up here, and then there's also like some sort of detailing on the upper part of this building, and that's another thing that Dr. Ibrahim talks about. He talks about these patterns being put in place to cause an interference pattern, so that when you look at them, it's the same as like how you look at a sunset when the if you look out over an ocean and you see the sunset, the color difference between the ocean and the sky, and in the sun setting, it creates an interference pattern that's supposedly very soothing on the psyche and can affect it'd be like, almost like create an altered state of consciousness. And then I believe that's almost like wires on the top of these buildings. It's almost like it looks kind of like spiky. It would have been a lot more detail up close, but it creates like an interference pattern when you're looking up, and it separates it from the sky. And another thing I want you to take note of all these pictures as well, is that all the skies are always washed out. You never see any clouds, you never see what's happening in the sky, and that's, again, deliberate photo manipulation. Again, just proving, you know, all these washed out skies, because that's where the airships were. That's where you see the technology in the sky that they don't want you to see. This one here was the old post office. Built in 2 years, 1880 to 1890. Again, you know, steps to get up to the ground floor. Bit of tech here on the top. And that's in Augusta, Georgia. So yeah, that's some lost, or I should say some impossible builds for you. But remember, nothing is impossible with horse and buggy. These always give me a little laugh. These fucking people just thinking that you can move a house with just horse and buggy, little leverage system. How are they doing that? How are they doing that? Oh yeah, you know, I feel like moving a house, honey. Alright, well, let's pack up our stuff. And he's like, no, we'll just take the whole house. Let's just move the whole house. I like the house, just don't like the location. Let's move it down the street. I got the horses out back waiting. What is going on here? Look at this one. Just moving your house through the snow. Fucking hell. This one, like, that seems like such a mammoth task. It would be easier to just rebuild the house. It would be easier. It's not that even an impressive house. Just rebuild it. Why are you trying to move the fucking house? Like, what? You have to reel it in? So then it moves it across this dirt? This fucking uneven mud dirt land that's unleveled, and then you have to move this and reel it in again? The lengths that these people went to. Amazing.
If you enjoyed this presentation and feel inspired to support both yourself and this channel, then head over to primalalchemy.co.uk. Awaken your potential with the world's only visionary health brand. Discover our collection of tonic herbal elixirs, rare crystals, and holistic health technologies. All chosen and created with intention, so you can focus on the energy you bring into your life. Whether you're grounding yourself, seeking clarity, or elevating your routine, Primal Alchemy supports every step of your journey. Use code REBUS10 for 10% off all superfood elixirs at primalalchemy.co.uk.